I wanted to spend a few seconds today to talk about something that's become a major problem on the internet, the topic of spoofing. Spoofing is often coupled with other types of attacks, phishing, social engineering. It all sort of gets lumped into the social engineering bucket. But the bad guys, sometimes called black hat hackers out there, and I know that's one of the things that makes all this cybersecurity stuff difficult to understand is there's a million different terms for all these things. So I'm going to try to cover as many of them as possible and see how, so help you understand how they're connected. So when you hear these things come up, you understand how they might impact you and the red flags you need to look out for to make sure that you don't get hit with one of these attacks and ultimately become a victim of some type of fraud. So spoofing, I'm going to read a couple of definitions because I think they do a nice job of summarizing. Spoofing, according to Technopedia, in general is a fraudulent or malicious practice in which communication is sent from an unknown source disguised as a source known to the receiver. Spoofing is most prevalent in communication mechanisms that lack a high degree of security. And then the FCC defines spoofing like this. Spoofing is when a caller deliberately falsifies the information transmitted to your caller ID display to disguise their identity. Scammers often use neighbor spoofing so that it appears an incoming call is coming from a local number, or spoof a number from a company or government agency that you may already know or trust. If you answer, they use scam scripts to try to steal your money or valuable personal information, which can be used in fraudulent activities. So again, that's from the FCC. And there's a couple important concepts there. First off, spoofing can come in many forms. Most of these various technologies that we rely on today, email, the web, the underlying protocols that make the internet work, the phone system, were all designed really at a time where security was not a concern. So most of these things are sort of inherently insecure. And over the years, we've been trying to retrofit security on top of these systems. And unfortunately, as I think we can all see every day from the hacks and breaches we read about, that it hasn't gone as well as we would hope. So it's extremely critical that you stay vigilant and are aware of the various kind of hacks that are taking place out there. So I got a couple other statistics for you. A recent study from Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a very well-known security company. They make firewalls and other sorts of security software and that type of thing. Recently released a study that said over roughly the last month, they've seen 192,000 attacks a week. That's a 30% increase. The FBI has warned that they've seen attacks go up almost fourfold over the last few months. Virtually anyone that studies this has seen a lot of attacks go up, and many of these attacks rely on spoofing, and spoofing coupled with other types of attack like phishing. So I wanted to show you a couple examples today and talk through these again so you know what to look for. So spoofing could be an email. In many cases, phishing emails they'll send out. They'll buy a list, they'll break into a site and steal all the email addresses they can find. The bad guys will spin up a server offshore somewhere and send out dozens, hundreds, millions of emails very quickly. And they'll use spoofing as one of the ways to make the emails seem legitimate. For example, I can send an email that looks like it came from some contact on your list if I had that information. Or as the FCC and the Technopedia definition said, I can send you an email that looks like it came from some trusted source. A bank, your bank if I happen to know who that bank is. It's very easy to do, does not require a lot of skill. Same thing with text messages. As the FCC stated in their definition of spoofing, which was more focused on the telephone system, I can send you a text or I can make a phone call where the number that came from is spoofed. Right? It purports to be a number, but it's really coming from another number. Again, this is not hard to do. The bad guys do it all the time. And of course, the idea is to give it some air of legitimacy. And you'll see here in a second how these things can be used so that ultimately, when you get a spoofed call or you get a spoofed email, it's much easier for you to be led down a rabbit hole and ultimately become victim of some type of fraud. So one of the things I wanted to show today is an email I recently got. So this is an example of phishing that also involves spoofing and then is an attempt to perpetrate some type of fraud. As you'll see, when you look at this email, this came to my email on the 15th. It's pretty creative. It purports to be from Booth and Brown LLP. And at the top, you'll see there, it says Booth at brown-booth-law.com. That is the email address it appears to have come from. But if you look at the email header, you'll see it did not actually come from that address. It's spoofed. And then this is clearly a phishing attack that's using what I would describe as a fairly evil and devious social engineering technique to try to get me to click this link. Now notice they took a guess at my first name, or perhaps they bought a list somewhere that had my first name in it. It says Dave. My name is Keith Booth, and I'm a senior partner at Brown and Booth LLP. Your spouse is contacting me to prepare the divorce papers. Here's the first draft. Please contact me as soon as possible. And you can see there's a link there. And if you look at the link to the naked eye, as you can see, it doesn't look all that unusual, right? It looks like a link and it points to what appears to be Word doc. But then you can also see where I moused over it, and it's showing the actual link that goes to, and you can see that's something entirely different, right? So we have a phishing attack here. They've used a spoofed email address to try to give it some additional legitimacy. Of course, they're trying to play on the emotions of the person getting this and thinking, oh my gosh, my spouse has filed divorce papers, I should click this link. And the obvious answer is, of course, you should not click that link. It was kind of funny. I called my wife and said, hey, it looks like we're getting divorced. And she laughed, it's like, yeah, she probably is thinking if only, right? So anyhow, that is a prime example of the kind of thing that's done all the time. It couples spoofing with phishing. And then ultimately, if you click that link, you're probably either going to get some type of malware, possibly ransomware, or they're going to try to steal your credentials. So nasty, devious. The black hats are very creative. They change their tactics all the time. So that's one example of phishing or spoofing. Again, you see a spoofed email address. Another extremely devious example that has recently made the rounds, that the many different experts have warned about. Brian Krebs brought this up. He's a well-known security expert. It's really bad. What they're doing is they'll go out and buy a list, right? A list of hacked names and so forth. In some cases, they'll buy what are known as CVVs. It's essentially a credit card record, sometimes called fulls, because the record is full of information about people. It might have, your name, address, social security number, bank information, and so forth. So what Brian Krebs discovered from talking to some people is that some banks, Citibank was one at the time, if you called and the number that appeared on their system was the number that was on file for you, you could get a limited amount of information about the account associated with that phone number without having to supply any additional credentials or any other sort of authentication information. So now the bad guys have a bunch of information about you. They know what bank that you bank with. They call the bank with your spoofed phone number. The bank gives up a certain amount of information. Then they call you using a spoof number that, of course, purports to be your bank. They might say, okay, I have 3 transactions here from your account. We think they're fraudulent. Can you confirm that these transactions are legitimate? So you look, and lo and behold, they are legitimate. And they say, well, okay, there's this suspicious activity. We want to send you a new credit card. What's your security word? Or whatever the process is for that bank. But they've used spoofing to get information from the bank. They're now using spoofing with the caller ID to give an air legitimacy to this scam call they've made to you. They're using information that they've gotten to add legitimacy and veracity to this call. Hopefully, from their perspective, they're going to get this information from you, at which point, in some cases, they literally are working in teams. They'll have another hacker on the phone with that bank waiting for you to give up this information. They'll give that to the bank, and then of course they've compromised your account and stolen your money or whatever else is they want to do. Again, this is an attack that's out in the wild right now. So spoofing is a major problem. You really can't underestimate the power of it when it's coupled with these social engineering and phishing and smishing. Smishing is text-based phishing attacks because it gives it that extra air of legitimacy. If you go read what organizations like the FBI and the IRS have to say, government agencies will not call you and ask for this kind of information. They won't call you. Typically, they'll send a letter. Your best bet is if you get a call from a number you don't recognize, just don't answer it. Let it go to voicemail. Assume it could potentially be one of these fraudulent calls. Let it go to voicemail. If you do answer it, or if they leave a message and it seems like it's legitimate, then what you need to do is go out of band. Right? We've talked about this before. use the zero trust model. Don't trust anything and verify everything. Again, these guys are very, very nasty. I've got one more story I want to tell here. Um, they'll stop at nothing, and they're very creative, and they know how to leverage this technology. So if you get a message, go out of band, pick up your bank account statement, go to your bank's website, look up a number there, because you really can't trust anything in an email that's been spoofed. You can't trust anything in a text that's been spoofed. You know, in that email, the phone numbers that I put in there could be bogus and could go to some call center overseas. If you think this all sounds crazy, do yourself a favor and just go search. You'll find examples of videos taken in these call centers where hackers are defrauding people. You know, so much money is being made at this, they can actually afford to pay people to work in the frauds. And or, for example, if you get malware and you can't figure out how to get Bitcoin because you want to pay the ransom to decrypt your files, you can literally call a helpline and they'll walk you through the process of how you can get Bitcoin to unlock your files. This stuff is totally crazy. So another example of where spoofing comes into play, and this goes back to some of the Checkpoint research that was done. Checkpoint has seen over the last month thousands of website domains being registered related to COVID-19 and coronavirus. Again, scams are running rampant, whether it's around the Paycheck Protection Act, the stimulus plan, people sending you stuff saying that you've been exposed to COVID-19 and you need to click this link and download a file and go to your local health center and get tested. You know, they're coming at this from every possible angle. And again, spoofing plays a big part in all these. Another thing another spoofing related attack that the FBI warned about recently is job related spoofing. And it works like this. And I actually know a guy here in Cincinnati, a friend of mine that owns a business, that had this happen to him. So it goes something like this. The bad guys go out and they'll set up an account on a legitimate job site like Dice or Monster. They will post a job on Dice or Monster. The job doesn't really exist. It's totally bogus, and it will link to a spoofed website. So they've gone to a legitimate company. They've scraped, which is basically dork speak for copied everything off a website, and they've set up a spoofed, sometimes called lookalike or doppelganger website that looks just like the legitimate company's website. So let's just pick a company like Kroger, right? So I register a domain, I might change the O in Kroger to a 0, or the E in Kroger to a 3, right? I want to make it look as similar as possible so that to the naked eye, it's not obvious. I go to Dice, I post this fake job on Dice. You know, the bad guys know right now during the pandemic, a lot of people have lost their jobs. They're looking for jobs. They're desperate for income for their families, so their guard is down. You see this job, looks too good to be true. A lot of times their couch is work from home jobs. You click the link and you don't go to the Kroger website, of course, because again, this is all fake. You go to the bad guys' spoofed or doppelganger website that looks like Kroger. The supposed job is posted there, and now they've got you in their trap. So you might fill out an application online. Now they've collected a variety of extremely sensitive information about you in your typical application. And, you know, assuming they can totally reel you in, they'll get you on the phone, or they might do a video interview, right? And prior to the pandemic, it might seem odd for someone to only want to do video interviews with you, but now it's more common. So it lends, you know, more credibility to their sting they're pulling on you here. So, you know, they do a couple interviews, and then of course they're going to offer you the job, but unfortunately you have to pay up front for some training, or you have to buy some equipment or something that they promise will be reimbursed once you get started in the job. And of course, as soon as you put the money up, they've disappeared, they've got your money, and they also have a bunch of sensitive information about you. So this spoofing thing is a big problem in a number of ways, and I just cannot reiterate strongly enough. An email can be spoofed, a text message can be spoofed, a phone call can be spoofed. You really can't believe your eyes anymore. You have to adopt a zero trust approach and verify out of band anything you get. And particularly when it comes to phone calls, don't answer the phone. If it's important, let it go to voicemail and call them back. And when you have any doubts whatsoever, if you are on the phone, hang up, go out of band, look up the number, call that organization back on their own, and make sure it's legitimate before you find yourself scammed. So I hope this helps. Again, people need to understand spoofing and how it's coupled with phishing and social engineering to perpetrate an enormous amount of fraud that's generating a lot of money for the bad guys. So it's not going to go away anytime soon. I hope everyone stays vigilant out there, stays safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime soon. Thanks.